Peeps, welcome to another video. Today it is part 3 of the Swoon Carter Messenger handbag sew along. So today we are going to be constructing the rest of the outer shell of the bag. So let's get started. Okay, so we're now going to attach the flap to the back panel, and so you need to pick one of the exterior main panels, doesn't matter which one at this point, and draw a line 2 inches down, and then we are going to center the flap against that line with the wrong side of the flap, or the interior lining side of the flap, face up, and we're going to stitch that into place at 1/4 of an inch from the edge of our flap. So I had the edge of my flap butting up against the 2-inch line mark that I have drawn. I'd made sure that I'd centered my flap, so I've got the center mark there and the center mark of the flap there, and I double checked by measuring the gap at each edge, and for me that came out to be 1 inch. Yours might be slightly different, but whatever it is, as long as it's the same, then it will be centered. Because I couldn't see my stitch plate and see where the 1/4 of an inch mark was, I used the edge of my foot, which I know is 3/8 of an inch away from the needle point, or the center point where the needle goes down. So I then moved my needle over to the right to make sure that I was stitching at 1/4 of an inch. So now that we've done that, we're going to flip the flap over. There's a tongue twister. Now if you can press it well, but what you want to do is you want to get it so that you're enclosing and keeping that raw edge there nice and flat, which showing you with one hand is quite difficult. Let me put you down so I can show you. So we're going to flip this over, but we want to keep it nice and flat like this. So this is going to be a whole bunch of fun to sew over, especially these pieces here, because there is a lot of bulk to go through, but we can do it. My machine will behave. I shall make it. So we are going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch along here, and then we're going to put this to the side for now. So this area is particularly bulky, especially when you've got to turn it back on itself here. So what I've done is I've unpicked the basting, and then I've just trimmed a very little bit away of the strap connector, so that hopefully there won't be quite so much for us to try and sew through when we're going to sew this flap down. So I'm going to give that a go now. Wish me luck. So one thing sewing machines really don't like is their foot going uphill. So in every sewing machine kit it comes with what I know as a hump jumper. So it's for me, I have 3 layers of plastic that are on this spinning dial here, and I can put them under the heel of my foot so that the toe and the heel are the same height when it's going over a large bumpy object like the strap connectors here, and it's actually worked like a treat, and my machine hasn't kicked up a fuss so far. So this is a good trick for, this is used a lot in jeans making as well, because you have a lot of times where you have lots of bulk to go over, for example when you're making your belt loops and things like that. So yes, hump jumpers, highly recommend. So once you've sewn that on at 3/8 of an inch, you should end up with something that looks like this. And if you have a look in here, all the raw edge of the flap is nicely enclosed, because the flap, these parts were slightly angled to make sure that all of the raw edge would get caught underneath that. So we can set this aside for now. Okay, so we are on to step 5, the main, or the front main panel. So we've got our main panel accents, which are these two. So they are 3 inches by 9 inches, and it wants you to fold in the raw edges to meet that center line that we drew earlier, much like we've done with pretty much everything else that we have been making. I am actually going to use Wonder Tape on this one, because we then need to position it correctly on the main panel and stitch it down. I'm going to use, obviously I can't pin mine because it's vinyl, so I'm going to use Wonder Tape to get these edges to stick, and I need to remember that it's these edges, these folded edges here, that I'm going to be sewing, so I can put the tape right in the center, which will then hold it in place onto the main front panel. The main front panel, it wants you to find the center, which I use my pattern piece for. This pattern piece, especially with it being double, is great. I've marked the center at the top and the bottom. I've then also marked where the main accent panels, or the main panel accents are going to go. And again, I have marked the top and the bottom, and then I have connected those with a line. Again, I'm using my friction pen. This does kind of rub away with some water, so I know that I can take this line off once I've finished. I'm going to stick those down, and then I'm going to top stitch both sides so these are in place. Now it does want you to use the strap holders and install the strap holders at this point, but I am using these, which are strap keepers. So I'm going to get my main panel accents on first, and then I can install my strap keepers. Okay, so I've stuck down the raw edges to the center with Wonder Tape, and I've now run some more Wonder Tape across here, which will help it hold it in place on my pattern piece. I'm going to do one piece at a time because this stuff is not the stickiest thing in the world, and it will not hold things forever. So I'm going to do, as I say, one piece at a time. So I'm going to put this onto my main panel, top stitch it down, and then I'm going to repeat for the other main panel accent. Now you want to end up with something that looks like this. So as I say, I'm going to repeat that for my other main panel accent. So the next thing we need to do is install our strap keepers, and they look like this, and they come with a backing plate and a set of screws, so 2 screws for each strap connector. I have my mini Phillips head screwdriver, and I have some Peltex. I'm also going to use a hole punch to make a hole for the screws to go through. I've tested this out on a scrap piece of fabric and it's the perfect size. My hole punch is part of my rivet press, and again that is linked in the description bar down below. If you don't have one of those, you need to find a way of making a hole, so an awl might be a good alternative because that is roughly the same size as the hole that my rivet press makes, but you want to double check on a scrap piece of fabric before you start punching holes in the main panel of your bag. According to the pattern, our strap keepers need to be 3 inches up from the bottom edge, so I have measured 3 inches up and I've drawn a line, as you can see there. I am then going to use my plate to mark the 2 places where I need to punch holes, and I'm going to do that for both sides. I'm also going to use my plate to mark the holes that I need to punch through my Peltex, and this is going to help anchor everything into place. I'm going to use my backing plate as a guide. I have the edge of the plate against the 3-inch mark that I have drawn there, and I've got it centered. It nicely is the same length or the same width as the main accent panel, so I'm going to draw those 2 holes in, punch those holes, same for the other side, and then we can install our strap keepers. So it turns out for me the layer of Peltex was a layer too far, and I couldn't get the screws to meet up with the strap keeper, so I am just using the fusible fleece that we have in here. I am, however, going to put a small piece of duct tape over both of these metal edges just to make sure that these screws don't rub on the lining fabric and tear holes in the lining fabric. So I'm going to get the duct tape out and duct tape over both of those plates. Duct tape is on. So the next thing will be installing the remaining part of our magnets, and so we're going to be moving on to the step that says if using magnetic snaps. Funnily enough, we need our magnetic closure to be 5 inches up from the bottom edge, and we need it to be centered. This is 1.5 inches wide, so that's 3/4 of an inch and 5 inches up. So I'm going to use the plate to place over that cross mark so I can mark the 2 lines for the arms of my snaps and place those in. Okay, so I've marked the holes, and then I like to use my small scissors and I put the point of my blade at the bottom of one of those lines and then push until enough of the blade has gone through that it's cut that line for me. And again, you want to err on the side of caution because you can always cut a bit more, but you can't take away a cut if you cut too much. And we've put a lot of hard work into this panel, so we want to make it right first time. So I'm going to install my magnetic snap. Fingers crossed that works. Yep, there we go. So that's going to go on like that. And then I'm going to put on the back plate, and I'm going to do the same for the other side. My magnetic clasps are in, and I'm also going to cover the backs of those with some duct tape. And yes, I have space duct tape because of course I do. So next we are going to be working on the side panels. So we're going to get our strap connectors, and this time I'm going to use tape because we need to get everything folded and attached to the side panel before we top stitch it down. So I have run tape down the center marking, and I don't know if you can see it now that the tape's on there, but there is a center marking that is 3/4 in from each edge, because this is 1.5 inches wide and we need it to be 3/4 wide in the end to fit onto our 3/4 inch D-ring. So I am going to fold the raw edges into the center and press them down on the tape, and I'm going to do one at a time because, as I say, whilst this tape will keep it in place, it won't stick it permanently, so you want to work one at a time. I'm going to fold the raw edges in to meet the center. I'm going to put my D-ring on, and then I'm going to fold the short edges in together so that I can then attach it to the side panel. Now I don't want to actually center my line like this. I find that you can't quite so close enough to the top, and you can sometimes see that join and it can come away. So I'm going to do it so that the join is down 3/4 away from the top, 1/4 of the way up from the bottom, and that's just a preference of mine. We then need to mark 3 inches down on our side panels, 3 inches down from the top in the center, and that's where our D-ring anchor is going to go. So I'm going to get all that done and show you every step as I go. So I've marked the placement for my D-ring anchor, and as you can see, the tape really isn't holding it down. It's doing better than nothing at all, but it's really not holding it down. So I'm going to pass my D-ring through, and as I mentioned, I want to turn up a little bit at the bottom here, and then way more. Again, doing this through the viewfinder is not the easiest thing in the world. A little bit more at the top, and I obviously will finesse this a little bit more before I stick it down, but I'm going to use some tape in the inside there to stick this down, and then I'm going to use some tape on here to stick this down to the place, the anchor point, so that I can then sew it. But the thing that I wanted to show you was that rather than this join here being centered, I want it further down towards the bottom and the D-ring at the top. So I'm going to use all the bits of tape that I've mentioned, and then I'm going to stick it down, and then I'm going to top stitch it in place. Okay, so I have my piece all folded in. There's tape in there, there's tape on here so that I can attach it to the side panel, and I'm going to attach it so that it's centered and that this edge is flush with the 3-inch mark, and then I'm going to top stitch around and make sure that that's all stays in place. I can then rivet it in place. Okay, so mine are definitely not perfect, but they are on, and when this folds back, you're not going to see that raw edge. That raw edge has definitely been caught. So I'm going to use a rivet on here, and I have found the center by making a diagonal mark through the 2 corners. So I'm going to put a rivet in each one of those for decoration purposes as well as strength. Then we can move on to the exterior, putting that together, which is exciting. Okay, so next we are going to take our contrasting bottom panel, which I have here, and then we're going to take one of our exterior main panels, and we're going to put them right sides together and sew along the bottom edge at 1/2 inch. So with the front panel, you want to make very sure that you're sewing it to the bottom panel to the bottom of the front panel, and the strap keepers should be underneath the magnetic closures. This is the bottom. So I'm going to sew on the panel with the flap, and we're going to be top stitching all of the seam allowance into the bottom panel. Then, me being me, I like bag feet, so we shall be attaching some bag feet before we go any further. As you can see, I have top stitched the seam allowance into the base panel, and I'm now adding my feet. This is not something that's in the pattern, but it's just something I like. I like how bag feet look. I have done mine 2 inches in from this side and then 1 inch in from the base panel seam here, and as you can see here, I think you can just about see, I have made a mark 2 inches in from this edge and then 1 inch in from here. So I'm going to use my awl, and I'm going to make a hole, and I'm going to push right through to the base of the awl, and then I'm going to take one of my feet that looks like this, and I'm going to push that through the hole so it goes nice and flush I want the legs to splay out that way. So I'm going to take the base plate, put that on there, and then open up the legs, making sure that it's nice and flush against the outer of the bag. If you didn't have the fleece on there, I would recommend adding some extra fleece or something in, but we have got the fleece. I'm going to use duct tape to cover up these metal edges as well. If you're making your bag out of fabric, you then want to fold the top edge of both exterior main panels under by 1/2 inch towards the wrong side, press. Fold the top edge of the side panels under 1/2 inch towards the wrong side and press. Unfold for now, leaving the creases in place. So basically what we're going to be doing later is dropping our lining into our bag and top stitching that closed. That's going to be our finishing method. Obviously I'm using vinyl, so I won't be pressing mine, but if you've been careful about where you put your foam, you already should have a 1/2 inch guideline for turning under the top edges of your bag later. If you're working with fabric, press it now, and if you are working with vinyl, you might want to draw in yourself in a line. Now if you draw yourself a line 1 inch down from the top edge, when you fold over to meet that inch line, you'll be folding over by 1/2 inch. So if you are not confident about the placement of your foam, draw in your inch mark now. Okay, so we're going to be sewing the side panels on next. The first thing that it would like us to do is to mark the center of the bottom panel and the center of the side panels. So then we're going to pin the center in place, and then we're going to pin the top edge in place, and then we're going to make the sides meet, as it were. They will meet, they're the right size, it just might take a few sort of like readjustments and pinning and or wonder clipping in my case into place. Once we've got it all in place, we're going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I have it all pinned in place, so I'm going to be sewing with this side up, this piece under the presser foot, and I'm going to be sewing with the bag side or the main body of the bag up by the feed dogs. I'm going to sew all the way around that at 1/2 inch. Okay, so before you start trimming away the excess seam allowance, because we need to trim this down to 1/4 inch, you want to go around and just double check that you're happy with all your stitching and you've caught everything. I had an area here where my stitches skipped, so I went back over it. So I'm now going to trim my seam allowance down, and then I can turn my bag right side out. Okay, so it's not pulling an elephant through a cat flap because we are going to be dropping our lining in later, but I can turn my bag right side out now and see how it's come out. Yeah, it looks like a little satchel. Dinky little bag. After the last one I made, it's quite a refreshing change. As ever, if you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments section down below. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!